RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOpsAF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello and welcome to RevOpsAF, the podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Kamala Thompson, and today I am joined by Peter Kirk. Peter, tell us a little bit about your background.
Hey everyone, I'm Peter. I've run marketing ops in RevOps at a number of different companies. Some you may have heard of, like Lucid and Mad Kudu. I've scored millions and millions of leads, and I'm really passionate about how to take an ICP and really run with it in any go-to-market function. Most recently, I've helped companies like Reddit and MongoDB take their ICP and really do something with it so that sellers, marketers, and CS folks can figure out who they should get in touch with on any given day.
And this is such a topic near and dear to my heart, so I will try not to take us on tangents throughout and stick to the plan. So first question. Yeah, this could get a little spicy, but that's okay. So first question, why do you think ICP is so tricky for people to nail down? And for those of you wondering about the initials, it's ideal customer profile we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I think ICP is tricky to nail down for a number of different reasons. Sort of depends on the stage of the company. I think the biggest thing is that most people know what their dream customer looks like. Say Apple. It's a big company. They have a lot of money to spend. A lot of different departments that may be users for your product. And also people understand who they should not get in touch with. Like freshman students at USC, probably not going to be a good fit for buying software. But that starts to break down in the middle, like in the gray area. Where do we draw the line of saying the people in accounts to the right should be a good fit for our business, and people in accounts to the left should not be a good fit for our business? There are a lot of different opinions that come to light when figuring out an ICP, but often there is disagreement on where to draw the line and disagreement on which attributes we should use to define our ideal customer profile.
Yeah, and humans are tricky. We have a lot of recency bias that plays into our profiles. And then we have a tendency too, I see in a lot of organizations, to chase what is a big deal without looking at the costs of supporting such a large customer, particularly in smaller companies that may not have the product where it needs to be to do so. It's just a hard thing to get right. It seems so obvious, but I've seen it go wrong. And speaking of going wrong, you mentioned some pretty big company names, and I'm not saying they had it wrong, but in general, in larger organizations, you'd think they're having success, so they figured it out. Do you see that as being the case?
I think some larger organizations have done an ICP exercise many times, and many have figured it out to an extent. Revisiting your ICP is really important, though. Your ICP, when you're growing from 1 million in ARR to 10 million, it's probably going to be a bit different than when you're growing from 10 million to 100 million. Oftentimes, we tend to ignore how our ICP changes as our go-to-market strategy shifts and as we layer in new products. So when I was at Lucid Software, we added 2 new products that had very different target audiences. And ultimately, that impacted the ICP of the entire business. We had ICPs that were product specific, but then we started to see a shift over time in what accounts and what people would ultimately buy from Lucid.
Yeah, that all resonates so much. And for those of you who haven't looked at your ICP since, 2022, might be time to do so. I think a lot of smaller organizations saw that they were experiencing churn because they were a nice to have to some companies and had to redo their ICP. But if you haven't, now's the time.
Absolutely. I often encourage companies to not revisit their whole ICP, like the high level, say like 5 criteria, but absolutely revisit the nitty gritty details on like a 6-month basis. I often see different teams, sales, marketing, CS, taking their high-level ICP of like employee count greater than 1,000, have raised X amount of money or in X industry, and then start to filter from there. So if we're spending money in an ad platform, we might use all the criteria that we can and then sort of give up and just say like any company that meets these criteria that's in the United States is fair game, when we really need to be more intentional about our targeting within marketing, within sales, and within CS.
And that is a great call out, because I've been in companies where we have 15 criteria we're using because we can. And a lot of the data isn't populated. It's super stale. We're diluting our score because we're relying on factors that don't exist in the system, even if it is a good fit in practice with the salespeople. So that said, what are some core tenets you think people should really stick to when they think about defining their ICP?
I think, and this is coming from a person who's been in ops for a long time, so approaching things as objectively as possible. I think creating an ICP is really a deep analysis that you need to do using objective inputs and subjective inputs. There are a lot of guides on how to do this, but I think to distill it down, we need to look at our top users and accounts, understand what features they're using, what the frequency is, how they're collaborating, what integrations they're using. Look at churned users as well. Are there commonalities between the two or anything that's really distinct? I've worked with a couple of companies where if a particular user connects to one of their core integrations, say Google Workspace, that's a really positive signal. So maybe our ICP could have an element of companies using Google Workspace. They're ultimately going to be a better fit. Should also look at closed won deals and closed lost deals. And then we should talk to people that have been involved in both. So we should talk to our users, understand what buying process they went through, what their options were, how they purchased, how they ultimately see their benefit from our product that we're selling. And we should talk to our sales reps and account managers. Oftentimes you'll get crucial insights from SDRs and AEs about what accounts always convert and which ones always go dark.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up actually taking the time to speak to the customer, because I think a lot of people in operations hesitate because they're not used to doing that. You talk to internal stakeholders all the time. You will be okay. And a lot of times customers are super eager to give you any and all feedback because they want a better experience. So go for it. I also like how you mentioned really doing that deep analysis. And I think I'm recalling a time when I worked with this fabulous marketer, Doug Bell. I'm giving you yet another shout out. I'm really good at analytics. I'm really good at figuring out what does and doesn't exist and what we should use. I am terrible at social selling. And what Doug did really well is he acted as an executive stakeholder in a way that brought the CEO and sales and the rest of the and customer success along on the process, so they all felt like they arrived at the decision together. Because I think a big hurdle that we in revenue operations run into is we can see in the data that something isn't working, and we try to sell it. It's very difficult to sell unless you have an executive who's charismatic and can drag people along with you rather than hitting people over the head.
I totally agree. I think one of the biggest roles that revenue operations can play within an organization is connecting people together. It's typically not in a job description, but ultimately you can be an ambassador between teams. You can connect some folks in product that would have never talked to anyone in your go-to-market organization, to sellers, to product marketers, to whoever that may ultimately come together and create a project that will benefit the organization. I think ICP is a great way to do that. And not only pulling in people from your go-to-market org, but pulling in people that are in your support organization or in product too. can be a great way to round out your ICP and get more buy-in on this goal.
Yeah. And I would encourage people to start thinking about acceptable customer profile and unacceptable in addition to ideal. Because especially in smaller organizations, you're going to have customers that churn eventually, but are profitable, that are an acceptable risk to bring on. And then you're going to have customers that are really difficult and expensive to support that may not be worth bringing on board at all. I know we focus on ICP a lot, but I think there's a couple other factors we could work in there.
That's a great call out. I think ICP should live on a spectrum. An ideal customer profile can be a confusing term. We're trying to figure out which companies and which people are going to give us money. And those people and those accounts live on the spectrum. So just focusing on the Apples and Googles of the world that we think will give us a lot of money isn't necessarily going to benefit us when there's so many small businesses in mid-market companies that may be even better partners and even better customers.
Oh, yeah. I see that all the time. I'm sure you do too, where we want to run after the enterprises, but the bread and butter of the business is mid-market. Why not go after mid-market?
Absolutely. And I think when we start to go deeper and really use our ICP, we can get a little bit more detailed. So maybe our ICP, coming back to this 1,000+ employees example, but maybe we're looking at companies generally that have greater than 1,000 employees. They're using Google Workspace and they have at least 100,000 site visitors a month. But when we're in an ad platform and using targeting options that an ad platform has, we're not going to necessarily be able to say that a company is using Google Workspace. So we need to think about some other attributes to use and maybe also increase our audience size by using different combinations of factors. Maybe we want to go a little bit more mid-market and look at companies that would be in our acceptable customer profile, have at least 250 employees. And maybe we can also sync in some other data too. Get a list of companies that are hiring in marketing. And we can create a lookalike audience and also layer in employee count as well to go after mid-market companies that are probably going to close at the same, if not a higher rate as the more enterprise companies we're targeting.
Great points. And we've talked a lot about targeting and leads and top of funnel. Why is it so critical? We talked about also selling to the rest of the business, but why is it so critical and how can people incorporate ICP throughout the go-to-market motion? Maybe we start with how.
Yeah, I think going more towards the expansion side of the house, I think it's really important to help folks in CS really be able to identify which people and which accounts are most likely to expand. Expansion is such a key driver of revenue. It is often something that we don't really discuss because we're so acquisition focused, like as marketers and as sellers. I think we also need to use ICP and layer in additional signals to help CSMs identify which accounts are churn risks and which ones are most likely to expand. As far as the how goes, we can create notifications that highlight when users at a company are no longer logging into our product. That's a solid churn signal. When a bunch of users are exporting all of their data from our product, another churn signal that isn't super ICP related, but is still worthwhile to flag. And then also companies that are a really good fit for expansion when they are starting to reach milestones or if new users are getting added. We can help a CSM spin up an expansion conversation.
And I'm just thinking that's fantastic, but I'm also thinking as well, even all sizes of organizations. So say larger organizations, it's easier to disconnect. You have large teams, you start operating in a bubble. I see a lot of times when marketing is optimizing for lead volume and not necessarily tracking it against how things are converting. And then sales is really focused on who will close. So you'll see a lot of leads that aren't targeted by the sales team and left to languish, what are some other symptoms that you've got some misalignment in how the different departments are thinking about their ideal customer profile?
I think a lot of symptoms can come to light with a feedback loop. I think the easiest one, which you already touched on, is complaints. If we have PSMs that are like all of the customers that were closed recently that were handed off to implementation are going to churn, that's a solid flag that there may be some ICP misalignment. If your SDRs are saying that all the inbound leads aren't booking meetings with me, that may be another sign too, that something is amiss with ICP. I think the easiest way is through feedback, but a second layer is a reporting layer to see what changes are happening in terms of conversion rate as we go down funnel. First piece would be looking at our MQL to open opportunity conversion rate. Is that going up or down over time? Are we converting our open opportunities to pipeline? Are we converting pipeline to closable deals? Further down the funnel, are we expanding our customer footprint? We're expanding our ARR footprint rather. How close are we to quota attainment for our CSMs in terms of expansion revenue? And what changes are happening in those expansion deal cycles? Expansion is a different beast than acquisition because deal cycles can be a lot more variable and tend to be tied toward some additional activity that's happening at the account.
So if you needed a little kick in the patootie to check out your ICP, don't wait until your NRR starts to show symptoms. Do it today. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for being on the show. You are going to be a speaker at RevOpsAF. So if people want to learn more about how to nail their ICP and actually use it, I highly recommend attending your session.
I'm excited to be there, hoping to meet some of you that are listening to this in person.
Oh, that's the best part. Let me tell you. Where can people learn more about your agency, your brand new agency, and network with you online?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, just look up Peter Kirk, and my LinkedIn is probably going to be in the show notes as well. I recently started an agency called Smooth Operator. So head to smoothoperator.cc. Feel free to book time with me there. We can chat for free for 30 minutes. I'd love to learn more about what problems you're facing and how I may be able to help.
I love the name so much, and forgive you for getting that song stuck in my head every time I see your LinkedIn profile.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.